Hello, this is Tom Ryan Remembers, Memories of Tom Ryan. Uh, Here we have Tom and his wife, Barbara Engelhardt. And I'm Kevin Ryan, his son. And here we go. Today's topic is Mexico, or a recent trip to Mexico, right?
Right, San Miguel de Allende. It's a Shangri-La. It is the most beautiful place. 10,000 Americans, Canadians that come down here. They find they can have a beautiful home because the workers have low wages. There's no other industries. And some of them go up to the United States to work and then send money home. And others work at very low wages here. And so Americans and Canadians can live here all year round, cheap health care, everything. It's a wonderful place to retire. So this Principia is not a cathedral. That's where a bishop is. This is just a little parish church, but it's a beautiful place. And they discovered silver here and in the 1600s, and they carried out millions of dollars worth of silver and sent it back to Spain. And so some of it they used to build churches. This was built by a Franciscan who got the money, of course, from the silver people. And it's still used every Sunday. We went to church here and just to see how they do it. And the church was full of people. And we had a wedding. We went there. That wedding was going on, a very expensive wedding. See all the flowers, and they had a large crowd for the wedding. So this is the kind of the center of town with a square around it, in front of it, and here's a sleeping parishioner next to the confessional, and they're more casual about religion, even though they're very religious. Most Mexicans are not practicing Catholics anymore, but they still have respect for the church, and so, but they're more relaxed with it. Everybody is in the church or not, but there's no other churches than the Catholic Church. But after the 1600s, they ran out of silver, and the town became almost a ghost town because there was no other way. It's a 3-hour taxi cab drive from Mexico City north, way up in the mountains, very hard to get to. And that made it not good for merchandising, not like many ghost towns that are in the United States. The gold gave out, and so the town had no other purpose. This one, the silver gave out, and there was lots of silver. And the only silver that stayed was in the form of these buildings. And the people abandoned them. Now, Allende, the name of San Miguel, St. Michael the Archangel, and then they added Allende, Allende. Allende was one of the leaders of the revolution to separate Mexico from Spain in 1810. And now Mexico had to fight several wars of independence, but this was the first one. And it started right here in this out-of-the-way place in the mountains of central Mexico. And the people still come here like they go to Boston or to the shrines of America's independence. They come here. But there aren't very many tourists, and there aren't very many Mexicans that visit here. So they treat the English-speaking people are what support the town. So they in the restaurants and so on, they understand enough English you can get what you want. Now this is right in the center of town, right beside the parochia, the church. And it's a band center, and they often have band concerts there. The weather is beautiful. It's cool, even in the summertime, because it's so high. Mexico City is 8,000 feet, and this is probably equal to that. So you notice people are wearing jackets or sweaters. And here we are in the public square, beautifully landscaped, and a lot of activities there. And the activities aren't for the benefit of the tourists. They're for the people that live there. And they dance and sing and have festivals. And we tourists can just sit there and watch it all. And there's plenty going on. So it's a wonderful place, the Central Square. And so there were some dancing and orchestra plays. And here these people are fixing the stones. And we went there twice, a whole month each time. And they were working on it the first time we came. And 3 years later, they were still working on it. They were very slow workers. They don't get paid very much. And they want the job to last. Now here we are at the door of Casa Calderoni. I think Calderoni is not a Spanish name. I think he's Italian. But Calderoni and his wife was from Texas, owned this beautiful place. And we paid $50 a night and stayed there for a month. And it included a breakfast. Oh, what a breakfast. A breakfast to order. And our room, each of the rooms in this Casa Calderoni, that means the Calderoni's house, was dedicated to a different artist. And this was the artist that our what's the name of the artist?
Volterra.
So so it was a small room, but it had everything we needed in it, and we really had a good time.
I wanted to say something about this picture. It was in the bathroom, and when you were sitting on the toilet, this is what you saw, and it was quite interesting to see all these pictures.
This is the table. Every morning we had breakfast at this table with whoever was in the building at the time, whatever. And we met tourists from all over the world. And the owners, Mary Calderoni, she would come and answer our questions. And we got to know each other. And people came from all over, not just the United States. I don't know how they found out about this town, because it's not easy to find. Even I've been to Mexico about a dozen times, and two of them were here. Here's Mary.
Can I talk about her?
Oh yeah, Mary.
Mary Calderoni actually has a connection with Loveland because her niece lives here, and it just so happens that the niece is a member of our church. So we had quite an intimate connection there. And so she invited us and a couple of the other people in the bed and breakfast to her own home for lunch. And she served Mexican pozole, which was absolutely delicious. She has a beautiful, beautiful home on top of a hill, kind of on the outskirts of town. And we just had a wonderful time visiting. This is one of the guests that was from Washington, D.C. area. So we got acquainted with people from really all over the world. And Mary is the one on the right.
She's an artist.
And this is her husband, Ben. And he and Tom just got along famously. They just had wonderful conversations. Mary is a very unique person, I think. She practices whip lashing. And so she put on a demonstration for us. And when she got to snapping both whips, it was just quite exciting.
She's one of the founders of this artist colony. It's a very beautiful building that was built, and they had it was a factory for textiles, and they tried to have jobs for the people here. And they formed a syndicate, it's called in Spanish. But a syndicate there means a labor union, and that they would participate. It was kind of a dream place, and the owner kind of built it as a hobby, I think, and it didn't survive because, of course, textile prices kept falling all over the world, and you could buy it cheaper, and they could not compete. So they just finally left it empty, and for a long time, and she had talked them into having had a home for artists. And so she took us on a tour of her artist. It wasn't hers, but she helped get it organized. And there were many artists there selling their artwork. And so that was supposed to be the industry that would support the town. But, you know, that's not a big moneymaker. We kind of have that here in Loveland, but not, it didn't make very much money. Here's Mary. Her husband, they were well off. They owned a lot of property.
This was a party that they put on to celebrate one of the, I think, the 10th anniversary of the opening of this artist's compound.
Yes, so the whole town showed up, and they had bands and dancing and food, and it was just wonderful. And it was mostly townspeople there. There weren't very many of us tourists. We just kind of got in on it, and it wasn't done for our benefit. It was done for theirs. They sure loved parties and loved dancing and singing and music and art. It was a favorite thing too.
This is, now we're on to the library.
Oh yes, the Americans and Canadians there built a biblioteca, which is a library, and they put English books in it and made it available to the town. And it was kind of their thank you to the town. And a lot of activities went on there. They had language classes, they had courses that people could take.
They showed movies.
And so it was kind of a gathering place. And of course, a lot of English was spoken there. We really enjoyed the biblioteca. This little girl, Mexican girl, she was learning how to play the piano. And so he would give piano lessons right there in the biblioteca, and lots of books, and you could check them out or read them right there. And this is the outdoor market. And it was not air conditioned, but you notice they're all wearing sweaters. It's cool. And of course, this is winter time. Well, it doesn't get really cold, but you know, sweater weather, it never gets hot. It's never cold. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place. I said I'd like to move there and live there, like a lot of Americans have, but I can't speak Spanish, and Barbara either. And so we decided it wasn't where to spend our retirement. This is a funeral parlor, and they made these candles out of wax, of course, and sold them for use in the coffins. People would buy candles and burn a candle in the church, and the candle light was supposed to be prayers that would go on when you weren't there. And so there were several churches in the town. That Parochial was just the main one. And they had lots of outdoor dining. You could tell the weather was great. And merchants sold things on the street. The streets were so narrow that it was not a car-friendly town. Very hard to drive a car. They didn't recommend having one there.
Can I talk about Pueblo Viejo?
Ah, yes.
This was our favorite restaurant because the concierge at our bed and breakfast, Casa Calderoni, was also a musician, and he had a little band that performed every night at Pueblo Viejo, this restaurant. And it was just a lovely place. Luis is, let's see.
The manager of the hotel,
Yeah,
where we stayed.
Yeah, Luis is the one in the blue shirt here, and his friend and one of his sons are in the band, and they play Mexican, old Mexican folk songs, and with instruments, flute, recorder, banjo, guitar, drum.
Very Mexican.
Yeah,
And the picture on the wall there is Emiliano Zapata. He was one of the revolutionaries that had to come back and fight the revolution all over again in more modern times. And so this place was named the Old Village. So it had things in it that you'd find reminiscent of the olden days. The crowd was small, and we had a front row seat, and we didn't even have to buy alcohol. You could, they were, I don't know how they ran it, but in case they had enough guests during the day to pay for it. And I don't think these musicians got paid very much. One of the son of Luis had to move away to another town to get a job in an automobile factory because he had wife and children to support. Luis was alone, and he had a job as a manager of our bed and breakfast.
hearing Luis and his granddaughter Frida singing brought tears to my eyes. It was so beautiful to see those two performing together. I think she must have been maybe 8 years old.
Yeah.
Beautiful young woman, girl.
And then they had a botanical gardens, and we met a man at breakfast who was staying at Casa Calderoni, who was the fern man. Ferns was his expert from the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. And he wrote a book about ferns around the world. It must have been 1,000 pages. And a lot of them were pictures of these specimens that are planted. Now, water is a problem, so they needed to have a catch basin for water. And that's another thing that limited the growth of the town is the lack of water. And so the water was up here in the botanical gardens, and then it flowed by gravity down into the town, and was enough water to supply a small town. And we went up there with him. And this is the syndicate. Syndico was used by the union, or it worked in the textile factory. But after the textile factory closed, they made it into an art center. And they had this piano. You want to tell about the piano?
Well, I had to practice while I was down there for a month because I was getting ready for a concert back here in Loveland. And so I asked Mary Calderoni if there was a piano I could play somewhere, just practice. She says, oh, go to the Sindicato. They have a beautiful grand piano there. And so the history of this piano is that it was a gift from Emperor Maximilian to his mistress in 1865. And after he was assassinated,
Well,
she was kind of kicked out, and maybe she was killed too. So anyway, at some point, San Miguel got a hold of this piano. It is very old, but it's a Chickering. It was made in Boston, and I had a really good time. There was a photographer who was taking a class at this Sindicato building, which was now a home for the arts, and a lot of piano music lessons were taught, and this photography class was being taught, and he was supposed to have a project for the day. So his project was photographing me playing the piano. So this is still more pictures of the building. It was
very
another beautiful
beautiful
building.
place. And I think they charged her $6 to rent the piano for the day. She was kind of surprised that you offered the
6 pesos.
6 pesos. She offered a peso. Yeah, $6. She didn't even expect to charge us. The rain is a very rare thing, but you can see how narrow the streets are. And people walk on these narrow sidewalks. And the kids were so polite that if we were up on the sidewalk and we came, they would step down into the street and pass us instead of making us step down into the street. No crime. Walk down around at night. in darkness, no street lights, and we'd go back and forth from the bed and breakfast, and we ate out the other meals, wonderful meals. Why did we eat? So that, yeah, so there's probably 4 or 5 churches, very elaborate churches. And that's what happened. The Spanish spent all their money on churches and palaces, and the English spent money on merchants and trade. And so the Spanish Empire didn't last very long after the silver and gold ran out. But some of it was spent here, and we really crushed. The town was, you could walk everywhere, and we'd walk from one place to the other and just examine everything. And then there was a bus station. That was the only, no airport or anything. We could get on a bus and go to a nearby town, and the nearest town was
Dolores Hidalgo.
Hidalgo. And it was where the Mexican Revolution of 1810 started. And every day on the Independence Day, the president comes here and they have a big ceremony because to remember the beginning of their freedom from Spain.
Every year, the president of Mexico comes to Dolores Hidalgo and gives a speech called the El Grito. And it was the speech that Father Miguel Hidalgo cried from the steps of the church in 1810 to begin their revolution.
So it was a priest, Catholic priest, that really started the revolution with his cry. And now that little town too, it makes pottery. They got a little pottery factory. And their pottery is sold all over, even in the United States, but they're poor. And so that's why it's such a wonderful place to retire, because you can hire people to do things for you. You can have domestic servants and live like a king for less than would cost you in the United States or in Canada, especially in California. A lot of people came. And there was plenty to do and keep busy and enjoy. The merchants spilled out onto the street outdoors because the weather was so friendly. And that was one of the few ways to make money, is to buy something and then resell it for more than you paid for it. The same with food, making it into dinners and then serving it in restaurants. They had a huge park, Juarez Park, named after another revolution. They had in 1865, Benito Juarez became the president, and he was a full-blooded Indian. Anyway, they named this huge park after him.
This is back in San Miguel.
Yes, we're not. Yeah. So there's a lot of history here. And there's 3 towns. They all were silver towns, and then all turned into almost ghost towns. They've been revived and restored, and people have fixed up these mansions and turned them into bed and breakfasts and other housing.
So we've talked about San Miguel de Allende, and we've talked about Dolores Hidalgo, and here's the 3rd town of Guanajuato. And this whole area just reminded me of the area around Boston and our revolution, the beginning, birthplace of our revolution. This is the birthplace of Mexico's first revolution.
Diego Rivera spent his childhood here. He's one of, I think, Mexico's most famous painters. But they didn't have any paintings by him. They're in Mexico City.
These tunnels were built for the silver mines, and when the silver ran out, they made them into pedestrian and traffic tunnels. Very narrow.
Not friendly to cars. And this is a vernacular.
Vernacular, yeah.
That goes up the mountainside. This is all built in little mountain valleys, and these towns are just beautiful. And on Mardi Gras Day, Mardi Gras is a French, New Orleans, but this was the New Orleans restaurant. We had food, different kinds of food. We didn't all make all Mexican food, but this restaurant served Louisiana food, and so they celebrated the Mardi Gras, which is at the beginning of Lent. And they were doing this outside the restaurant to encourage people to eat Louisiana food, New Orleans food.
So Shrove Tuesday in the evening, they have a celebration of egg smashing. And all year long, the people blow out the contents of their eggs and save the shells and paint them like we dye Easter eggs, only theirs are just the shells. And then on Shrove Tuesday, you gather in the courtyard here in the Hardin, and the kids especially will go around throwing these eggshells at people, smashing them. And here's some of the women selling the eggshells to the kids so they can go around.
And they
have
can be
so
kind of
much fun.
naughty, but they're so well behaved.
Yeah,
They would never, they'd look at us like, no, I'm not going to throw one at you. This is for fellow teenagers and family members who would.
I think that's the end of our slideshow.
It is.
Yes.
These people are the kids are so polite and kind and wonderful. And you don't never feel uncomfortable or in danger or any crime. And I know the guy on the bus said he lives there. They took us on a bus ride to a ranch that was 1,000 years old. And they hit the bus driver. He was talking to us, and he said he broke his wrist and he went to the hospital and they set it, put him in a cast, and it only cost $100. So he said, you don't need to worry. But they sell insurance that you can get a jet plane if you should get sick, and it's more than they can handle at their local hospital, which is a pretty small hospital. They'll fly you back to the United States where your Medicare will work. Medicare does not work in Mexico. And they'll fly you back to get treatment in the United States. So no worry, even if you get sick beyond the care of the local hospital.
So quick question, Shrove Tuesday, what does Shrove?
Shrove Tuesday is the day before Ash Wednesday. And on Shrove Tuesday in our church, we have a big pancake supper. And it is the end of Mardi Gras for the Catholics. And so you just live it up and stuff yourself with pancakes. And then the next day is Ash Wednesday. And then for 6 weeks, you are on a very penitential
Lent, right?
Lent. Yeah, you're in Lent.
The beginning of Lent, when you're supposed to go without meat and have and so on, sober, very sober. So you have a big party just before you go into Lent, which is it. So the Mexicans there in that town are still very Catholic and attend church. We went to church on Sunday once just to see what it was like, and the church was full. So, but their young men will go up to the United States and work and then send the money home by money order to help support the family because there's no work in San Miguel de Allende.
I have to say one final thing, if I may, and it just occurred to me that in this time of racial tension, exaggerated racial tension, the town of San Miguel definitely had 2 layers. They had the Mexican Indian layer, who were mostly the waiters in the restaurants and the tenders of the gardens and the people that did the work. And then there were the rich Americans and Canadians that came down and took advantage of that.
They were glad to have us.
Yeah, they were. But if you went very far outside of town, you found some extreme poverty. And in this time and place, that just occurred to me that
Yeah. Now,
it's
really,
not all a fairy tale down there.
the Aztec Indians were used as slaves, peons that dug the silver and died digging it. And so the Spanish introduced that abusive use of the poor. And so it is, you feel a little uncomfortable, but they're always grateful and they don't beg. I don't think we ever saw a beggar, which is common in Mexico City. So it's a very different kind of town, rural Mexico at its very best.
Great. Thank you very much.